Welcome to the exploration of consciousness.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the exploration of consciousness. I am your host, Matt Presti. This is my 13th show and my first show of the year 2013. My guest today is Robert Otey. His website is www.feandft.com, and there you can find a complete debunking of fraud science and mathematics. My first interview with Robert occurred on 4/26 of 2010. That makes 3 years of working together. Our second interview turned into a series called the Secret of Light series, which presented the collective works of Dr. Walter and Leo Russell, the cosmology, science, and philosophy of illumination. This particular endeavor may qualify as the longest-running interview podcast in internet and history, but you will not see it in the Guinness Book of World Records. Today's topic will be a debunking of the book The Tao of Physics by Fritjof Capra. Before I bring Robert Otey on, I'd like to quickly address a couple things concerning my own life and my own exploration of consciousness, which is the reason for this show. The questions that originally drove me to produce this series of interviews was to find out the answers to the questions that we all ask. Who are we? What are we? Why are we here? And where are we going? These questions were answered with a thorough study of the works of Walter and Leo Russell. I came to the conclusion that no man, government, or other entity is capable of giving man any solutions. The solutions to man's problems must come through himself. That is, and always has been, where the answers lie. And in this search for true soul, you develop and water the plant that eventually grows into the being that becomes your true self. This being must be nurtured, it must be paid attention to, for it is the source of energy in you. You cannot afford any longer to give your energy away to fictitious entities called governments. Governments do one thing: they enslave people. No model of government has ever lasted more than approximately 250 years before it begins to turn on its own people, because the very thing that was empowered is non-existent. The very power that is turning on the people is the people's power that has been given away. This power is self-consuming and will only do one thing: destroy those who take part in it and itself. So rightfully speaking, self-governance is the solution to the problem. To learn to govern oneself, to be so intellectual and so aware that one does not need an external authority to govern oneself with. And with that said, that brings us to our TEC word of the year for 2013, and that word is discernment. Discernment is the ability to judge well, to make truth out of falsehood, and to see beneath the lies, to be able to uncover the truth in any situation. To develop discernment, mankind must practice discernment. He must learn to think. He must learn to understand, to stand underneath that which he claims to know. He must look into the heart of all matters and judge not with his brain but with his mind, to see not with his brain but with his heart, and to know within his true soul what is true and what is not. The masses have always been deceived, and that is for one reason: because they lack discernment. The greatest gift man can give to himself is the understanding that he is the power that he seeks. There is no external authority on planet Earth that can usurp the power of the mind through the person who wields it. Those who wield the power of mind cannot be controlled. They do not seek governance. They seek only to govern themselves, and they also desire that others would do the same. Man does not need religion. Man does not need authority. Man does not need to be told what to do or how to live. It is innate in all men that we should live through our hearts and make ourselves into the kind of men that we'd like to see in the world. And women. This is fundamental if we are to transform our society from one of taking into one of giving. There is nothing in nature that takes. This is fundamentally flawed to assume that taking is some kind of survival mode tactic that will carry man into the future. It will not carry man anywhere but to an early grave. With all that said, we will now use discernment to sift through the mountains of sense-based misconceptions that surround the field known as quantum physics. I'd like to welcome Robert Otey back to the exploration of consciousness once again. Hi, Rob. How you doing?
Good. How you doing, Matty?
Doing well. Well, this is a long overdue show. We've done quite a lot of work in the past 3 years focusing on redelivery of the Divine Iliad message of Walter Russell and the works of Leo Russell along with that. Their joint work together, beautiful stuff. Great to have been a part of that with you, and it's a continuing project that we're moving forward into the future. This is a necessary breakdown of a book by Fritjof Capra, The Tao of Physics, and I guess the reason we decided to do this, folks, is because so many people still have their head stuck in the quantum universe, the everything's quantum. Now, I've read articles about quantum suicide and quantum jumping and anything. There's a billion kinds of quantum in the New Age movement out there. Yet nobody seems to really know what a quantum is or have really any idea of what quantum is. So we're going to get into the deconstruction of the fallacy of quantum mechanics and quantum theory and quantum relativities. Robert, why don't you let the audience know what pages in particular we're going to be focusing on from this book?
The meat of it would be between 47 and 81, and 155 and about 194.
Okay. Well, right out of the gate, I've been reading this book for probably the past month and a half, perusing it, and definitely I feel compelled to put into words concerning this book that, as we all know, at least in our group of the Russellian Light group, the people studying the more natural science of the world, that natural science was not discovered by modern physicists. It was in fact rejected and discarded around the turn of the 20th century in favor of a more sense-based empirical and spiritless science, which now runs the world, unfortunately, like an overgrown weed throughout the entire university system. This book, in just the first few pages in, seemed to be flowing backwards toward that genesis of the major mistake in science in a desperate attempt to marry the sorry state that physics has found itself in. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely.
So, I mean, they're basically trying to marry their false foundation to a very well-established the very well-established Eastern philosophies. And those really stand on their own merit without the need of an unbalanced marriage of this risky sort. So
The two are mutually incompatible. One's, done through the scientific method is through empirical reductionism, laboratory experiments, and ad hoc theories, whereas the Eastern method is cosmic illumination. It's knowing that comes from stillness. So the two are diametrically opposed, and this marriage of the two is absolutely false. There is no similarity at all between these two methods.
the natural scientists of the late 19th century basically put forth warnings to their colleagues that this would occur. I mean, we could name several natural scientists, and they basically warned this group of empiricists that they were treading down a dangerous path that would ultimately result in a dead end. It seems no one listened. So
Right.
say that, in a sense, the energy barons sort of guided and favored and funded the materialistic crowd, outward-looking only sense-based empiricists were the ones rewarded with the grants and the research endowments and the Nobel Prizes later on to sort of lock humanity into a sense-based prison, if you will. Would you agree with that?
Right. Absolutely. And the warmongers and the central bankers also profit greatly from this backward system of mind control, which keeps us enslaved to a backwards explosion-based technology, requiring their fuels and their wars, in order to get, our basic energy needs provided for.
Sure. And, more of the effects of this wrong thinking concerning science leading off in this uncharted direction of empiricism and sense-based only approach to the universe is, can be witnessed in Chernobyl and Fukushima, which still quietly burn, as well as 2,800 plus nuke tests on planet Earth, and the psychosis of Edward Teller and the massive increase in industrial waste and pollution, which have inevitably altered the face of the Earth, not for the least bit better, and science continues to destroy the environment with more and more toxins, from pharmaceuticals to chemtrails, their drone programs, weapons and machines of death for profit over sharing and for conquest over peace. I mean, it's again not a natural approach. So this seems to be a patchwork trying to almost reach back 100 years. And I can't help but agree with Walter Russell's assessment that science must go back 100 years, in other words, into the past to correct the course it took in the materialist-only approach to the universe. And as there is no material cause for which science, is now seeking, they're basically running laps in the dark in an endless circle in the search for the ultimate particle that will never amount to a true view of universal cause. So without further ado, let's get into this book. Where would you like to begin?
Well, I think we should just qualify some of the foundations of quantum quackery, and we need to remove those because they're false. So, typically people use this term quantum, and these people don't even know what it means. I mean, so what is a quantum? In quantum mechanics, a quantum is a fundamental quantum of energy, as if energy exists in little bundles. These little bundles were blown out from the Big Bang, according to this, bizarre cosmology. So it's as real and as ridiculous as ether is. It's the same sort of reductionism, empirical reductionism, that tries to go and reduce things to their smallest points and particles, like these so-called ether particles that don't exist. So the modern scientist is just as guilty as the ether theorist. The modern quantum quack is actually doing exactly what the ether theorist did by claiming there's something that exists in these little tiny bundles and all energy comes from that. So that's false. The indeterminacy, the Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, is one of the main pillars of quantum quackery. And the reason being that they claim, or Heisenberg claimed, that it was impossible to know the position and momentum of an electron in an orbit around a nuclear atom. Well, nuclear atoms don't exist, so the point's moot. It's no more real or has no place in reality any more than Stephen Hawking's describing mathematically the swirling motions around a non-existent black hole. So we have this same kind of backwards looking at things that has been rewarded. I mean, Heisenberg got a Nobel Prize, and so did Hawking's, and they're both getting these false Nobel Prizes for things that don't even exist. So there is no nuclear atom. I think we're going to go ahead and put links to D.B. Larson's The Case Against the Nuclear Atom. We don't need to go too deeply into that because Larson absolutely obliterates the concept of a nuclear atom as dreamed up by Rutherford and Bohr, and the historical development of this insane proposition called a nuke atom. The other pillar of quantum quackery is the particle wave duality. And this entire myth is founded upon a little shell game that the scientists play with us. And it is that they claim that they're firing little electron marbles, little balls, little photons, if you will, little round spherical bodies from their electron guns when they're doing their dual slit experiment. So the reality behind it is there is no nuclear atom. Those little electron balls don't exist, and they're substituting this mythical explanation of a nuclear atom with these fake electrons for the waveforms, the electrical spiraling waveforms, which are actually being fired out of an electron gun. So the two pillars of quantum mechanics are both fraudulent. There's no reality to them whatsoever. And I mean, very, very easy. There's a very easy way to demolish quantum mechanics, and that would be the compressibility of atoms. You can take a metal and put it under millions of pounds of pressure and compress that metal so it's, maybe half the size that it was when it began. Well, in quantum mechanics, those intermediary orbits of electrons would all have to be changed as well. They would have to be half of the distance that they were before because everything's been smashed down into this compressed condition. Well, uh, that proves it right there. That's not acceptable in the theory itself. So just the compressibility of atomic substances alone is positive proof that quantum theory is false. But let's go ahead and begin going through Capra's book here, and we'll start on page 47, where we see he's got a reference here, a diagram that says interference of two waves, and he shows us these typical 2D wave forms that are basically time stopped, smashed into two dimensions, and therefore don't even represent real waves. These waves here on this picture don't even exist. So there's no such thing as undulatory waves in the universe, in the real universe. So number one, waves are misrepresented. And he goes on for, to page 50. At 50, he starts talking about the nuclear theory of the atom, which he falsely claims has been validated. So any thoughts of yours on this so far, Matt? You have anything to add to this as we move along?
Well, yeah, he validates, his academic, parroted, learnt theories by rote throughout the book. There's several different parts that I noticed where I made notes that the assumptions that science has made are thereby extensions become his assumptions as well. I guess when you base your entire book on a science that has no reality or bearing with nature, then you're apt to promote assumptions as well. So there's definitely a relationship between his assumptions and the assumptions in science, as that's what he was taught. So, again, we have to look into the New Age movement, who also uses assumptions in its own work to promote falsities, whether they're even aware of it or not. I mean, that's one of the things that spurred us to do our entire series, was to debunk these assumptions of what matter is and what substance is. So...
Right. Absolutely.
So Rob, yeah, basically by assumption, he goes on, his classical schooling hunches that all he has been taught is correct enough to proceed to further marry failed concepts with even more fallacious theories that do not work or resemble in the slightest bit the working of nature. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. This is completely completely against nature. This has nothing to do with nature at all. In fact, let's see, where does it say?
It's a couple pages.
Let's go to page 140. If we go to page 140, let's get it right out of Heisenberg's mouth here.
Okay.
Let's see, what did he say? Heisenberg, he says, in atomic physics, we cannot talk about the properties of an object as such. They're only meaningful in the context of objects' interaction with the observer. So that means that these things actually have no reality unless we're here to watch them, which is basically absurd. It's the old, if a tree falls in the forest, does anybody hear it? If nobody's there or whatever, or does it make a sound or whatever? It's the same kind of ridiculousness. But in the words of Heisenberg, what we observe is not nature itself, but nature exposed to our method of questioning. That's right out of Heisenberg's mouth. So he's just telling you right there, this has nothing to do with nature. And so I think as we move along here on page 61, I'm going to, basically there's problems on every single page of this book. I looked through all my notes on here, and we could go through every single page, but we're going to try to be as brief as possible just to bring out the highlights of this. If anybody wants any more proofs, just go ahead and ask us, and we'll give them all that they need.
Sure.
So on page 61, he says, let's see, the first 3 decades of our century changed the whole situation in physics radically. 2 separate developments, that of the theory of relativity and of atomic physics, shattered all of the principal concepts of Newtonian worldview. That's not true. The notion of absolute space and time, the elementary solid particles, the strictly causal nature of physical phenomena, and the ideal of an objective description of nature. None of these concepts could be extended to the new domain into which physics was now penetrating. At the beginning of modern physics stands the extraordinary intellectual feat of one man. So here we go with the Einstein worship.
Right.
Albert Einstein, in 2 articles, both published in 1905, Einstein initiated 2 revolutionary trends of thought. One was his special theory of relativity. The other was a new way of looking at electromagnetic radiation, which was to become characteristic of quantum theory, the theory of atomic phenomena. The complete quantum theory was worked out 20 years later by a whole team of physicists. Now, that's total bullshit. That was never worked out. The Copenhagen group never worked out one theory of quantum mechanics. There's always been dozens of theories of quantum mechanics. So, that is false. It's a massively false statement. Relativity theory, however, was constructed in its complete form almost entirely by Einstein himself. Einstein's scientific papers stand at the beginning of the 20th century as imposing intellectual monuments, the pyramids of modern civilization. Now, as you and I know, and everybody in our group, we've seen all the work debunking Einstein and his relativity theories. So this Einstein worship here by Capra is a massive falsification of and a false validation and support for all these ideas here.
Yeah.
You have anything to add to that?
Yeah. Well, the closest thing Einstein came to the pyramids was his invention of the concrete refrigerator, which never took on. So, I mean, that's the only thing he ever did invent. So I have a real problem. He as a humanist, as you've said before, he was A+ for his humanism in his quotes. But his armchair theories, which have been debunked, which disqualify him as a great thinker, therefore, why is his status still that of a great genius when geniuses are known for their production of bodies, not just armchair theories, which have been debunked. So really, it's a matter of perception of the public, and The Sale and Manufacture of St. Einstein is a wonderful book. If anyone can find that, I fully recommend you get it. And there's a section in there just on the cartoon hero-like worship of Einstein, which basically sets up the wall between you and reality, and the inability to get beyond the false assumption that Einstein's some form of genius. And everywhere you look on the net, every science website, every university hallway, there's a poster of Einstein, as if, this hero worship is just drilled ad infinitum into the minds of these impressionable young college students. So they really set you up for this cage. You're literally put into Einstein's concrete refrigerator with no way out. So yeah, it's
well said.
It's just a form of
about as heavy
idolatry.
As the pyramids too, right?
Yeah, indeed, and you'll be crushed under its weight if you're not careful. So you have to lose this idea of hero worship. Just like it's no different than somebody who still worships George Bush, in my opinion. They, despite the massive proof that the entire thing was fraud, staged, rigged elections, and the very prominent fact coming out today that neither party is worth listening to. You could also say that about the relativists versus the quantum people. This
right.
need to marry the two together. What you're trying to marry together is two frauds. In other words,
Right.
be it intentional fraud or otherwise, that's not the issue. The fact is that if you take the time to look at those who have debunked thoroughly both of these assertions, then you don't need to understand a marriage between two failures. You just need to proceed from there. Yeah.
Right. And quantum relativism it was, quantum mechanics was completely rejected by Einstein. And here we have people in their desperation trying to marry Einstein's work, to quantum mechanics, quantum relativity. So that's the way this racket's run, man. I would also interject, just a little bit a note from my own personal research about this is that, it's very, very peculiar, very, it's that 1913, is when this country was basically sabotaged. The bankers took over this country with the central banking system, Federal Reserve, and within 2 years that I've noticed in physics, by 1915, Einstein was all of a sudden raised to be this idol, this massive hero, this intellectual giant. So here we have the people that are supporting him finally get control of the printing presses, and they're printing as much money as they want. Nobody ever, looked um, you know, looked at the accounts and what's
Yeah,
it
there's
called when
been
they
no audits of the
audits?
Federal
Yeah, there's
Reserve
been no
in
audits
history. So
ever. So these people just printed out as much money, and they've been funding their people and pushing their people in positions of power and false authority and false intellectual status since then. And I really believe it's because they had gotten all power, by 1913, and from that point on, we've just watched the complete demise of physics. The false physics has been promoted ever since.
I'd say the false banking system, World War One
Yeah,
broke
yeah,
out about that time, and
right.
all these horrendous things in that year
Yeah,
began to take place. We're 100 years from that year today. I often wonder
yeah,
what their big plan is, if they plan to institute the Globero currency, or introduce
right.
the Amiro.
The Globe Bureau.
Yeah, the
Fuck.
Globero.
The
Who knows? It's just it's absurd. It's this vying for power and control, which is the greatest illusion of all, and it causes the most damage in the human family world. It's quite sad, but hopefully it can be overcome with enough discernment, which is the tech word of the year. That when you listen back to the show, I do a intro and pick that word for the tech word of 2013 is discernment. So really, that's what it takes to sift through all the BS here.
Truly.
Um,
Okay, so moving on, here we
mhm.
go, page 62. Copper says, according to relativity theory, space is not three-dimensional and time is not a separate entity. Both are intimately connected and form a four-dimensional continuum, space-time. In relativity theory, therefore, we can never talk about space without talking about time and vice versa. So, as we know, this is pure BS because there are only three mutually orthogonal positions in three dimensions. So, a fourth dimension is absolutely impossible. Plus, time is not a dimension, it is the measure of motion within three dimensions. So, uh, here, once again, we have Capra, just accepting, without any thought, without any critical thinking whatsoever, this false idea of Einstein.
Yeah, the four-dimensional continuum space-time, in other words.
Exactly. It's pure BS. It does not exist. And if we go to page 63, here it is. We were just talking about 1915. It says, in 1915, Einstein proposed his general theory of relativity, in which the framework of the special theory is extended to include gravity, the mutual attraction of all massive bodies. Whereas the special theory has been confirmed by innumerable experiments, that's total BS. It's been confirmed in mathematics. It has not been confirmed in innumerable experiences. The general theory has not yet been confirmed conclusively. So what he's saying here is actually false, and it's based, and Newton made the same mistake. W.C. Wright proved that there's no such thing as a mutual attraction of all massive bodies. And I've
Right.
got
Now
three series of videos.
talk about W.C.
Go
Wright a
ahead.
little bit, and we'll put the link up in the video to this. So
Okay, yeah. Basically, W.C. Wright showed with the parallel poles being parallel, And I just uploaded a video yesterday. I mirrored somebody's video where Ed Leeds Scalman also proved that the poles are parallel between the sun and the planets and all the moons. And this, by extension, you can see the same thing would be true of a galaxy. There are two hemispheres. There's obviously a northern hemisphere and a southern hemisphere. So the way that they're set up magnetically, according to the magnetic theory, which we don't have time to really discuss at this point, but in academic terms, they have a magnetic north and south. So, so I don't know where I was going with that. Anyways,
Yeah,
the
about
point of the
W.C.
matter
Wright
is
and parallel
yeah,
poles.
W.C. Wright, he basically set up lots of models, about over 100 models, where he showed with parallel poles that in fact the planets in large heavenly bodies are not mutually attractive. They have mutual repulsion. They're actually pushing against each other, and he proved that beyond any doubt. And he did that for 40 years. There are 3 sets or 4 sets of videos, I think, on my 77 G-Slinger station, which show all of W.C. Wright's works as well. And what's extremely important about the watching these videos is to read the descriptions that I wrote in the show more areas, because what I did is I translated Wright's beliefs into Russellian science so the language is consistent. And basically he both confirms what Russell says and Dr. Kashava Bat with his vortex solar system
Right.
model.
That really helped to, and when I watched that, helped to explain a lot. It was also described that gravity would be more likened to a push force as opposed to a pulling one. But you know that this page here.
Well, actually, what's going on there is not gravity. It's what you're seeing is the force of the electric rings. See, the north and the south are what let's call it male and female. They're sex-divided rings. So
Mm-hmm.
there's mutual repulsion between, if you take two heavenly bodies that have their poles pointed in the same direction, they can't mate. But if you were to take a north and a south heavenly body, their poles, and put them together, they would be able to mate, and we would call that attraction. But it's an illusion to our senses. Attraction doesn't exist. It's just that the spiraling electric rings, which give them form, allow them to mate. So that's the reality behind that.
Okay, understood.
Great. So the force of gravity, according to Einstein's theory, has the effect of curving space and time. I mean, how can you curve time? That has to be one of the most ridiculous ideas ever put forth. Yet here we have, millions of academics just accepting this stuff hook, line, and sinker. This
Mm-hmm.
means that the ordinary Euclidean geometry is no longer valid in such a curved space, just as the two-dimensional geometry of a plane cannot be applied on the surface of a sphere. Well, the Euclidean geometry is the magnetic space geometry, and these people act like this stuff doesn't exist, but it's actually the foundation of the electric universe of motion. So Euclidean geometry is extremely valid. I mean, it
Would
has a
you
place in the perfection of the creator's magnetic universe of space geometries.
would you say Euclidean geometry and magnetic space geometry could be likened to scaffolding?
Absolutely,
Like you
that's
can
it.
picture a dome. You know, the dome didn't just get there because it takes a tremendous amount of scaffolding around that dome and inside it to build the models. So Frank Chester, in his work with the Dodecahedron, a never before existent form in this human world, which this man created, which is 2 kites and 2 triangles, all equal sides, which it's lawful. Proves that that's the geometry surrounding the heart. Is that correct?
Yeah, but there's not 2 kites and 2 triangles. There's what, 3 kites and 4 triangles.
Three
That's 7
kites and
sides.
4 triangles. Okay, I need to brush
There you
up on
go.
my
Yeah.
sacred geometry a little bit. That's one of my
Yeah.
weaker
No
points.
worries.
But the cube and
Yeah.
the sphere, the interrelationship between the unmanifest, the creator's still immutable magnetic planes of zero curvature, and the scaffolding which surrounds the objects in motion, the unseen, in other words,
Right.
are the controlling dominant
Right.
factors.
Yeah, and that would be a Euclidean geometry. I mean, although Euclid never saw it, but it's based upon Euclidean geometry as well, triangles and kites and squares. So anyways, he says Einstein's theory now says that before I say that, I just want to say that, yeah, the scaffolding, as you're talking about, the magnetic space geometry
Hmm.
is the space geometry that gives form to the electrical motions that produce the human heart. And, as Frank found
Exactly.
out, there are twin opposing vortices there as well. And all of nature is based upon twin opposing vortices from atoms to galaxies. So this was a massive confirmation of Russellian science when Frank Chester confirmed this, because as above, so below, as within, so without. The heart of man and the heart of the creator and the heart of all creation is the same. It's all the same. It's a still point with twin opposing vortices, which supply the motions to create the illusion, the simulation of the idea that's held in the stillness of eternity.
Very
So,
well
anyways,
said.
he says Einstein. What was that?
Well said.
Oh, thanks, man. So Einstein's theory now says that three-dimensional space is actually curved, and that the curvature is caused by the gravitational field of a massive body. Well, as we know in Russellian science, there's no such thing as a gravitational field. Gravity is not even a force. It's stillness. It's points and shafts of stillness which center cubic wave fields and produce spherical bodies, heavenly bodies. So he's way off here. Einstein has no clue to what gravity is, nor does academic science, nor did Newton. It's not an inward pulling force. It is absolute stillness which controls the spiraling electric rings that create the electrical tensions, the electrical potency, the electrical concentration of energy into a spherical form.
Right. Well, Capra on 63 there, states what he doesn't know quite blatantly, that the general theory has not yet been confirmed conclusively. However, it is so far the most accepted, consistent, and elegant theory of gravity. To someone like us, there are several. The push gravity model by W.C. Wright was more elegant and, of course, less accepted. But that doesn't mean that it has any less importance. But the most elegant theory. Conception of gravity that is actually true to nature that I've found by studying multiple different ones was the one of Russell, that it is stillness and it divides into shafts of so-called north and south upon which all motion spins, and that's conclusive in how we can view DNA to the galaxy. All motions in the universe spin around that omnipresent gravity of mind itself, which is stillness.
Right. Yeah, and W.C. Wright, he produced hundreds of models. Academics have produced zero models. And so his work has all been validated and proved. It was proved for a period of 40 years. It was taken to the leaders of, the UC system, the governor of California, the leaders of the school systems for children, and everyone. They saw the proofs. They could not deny the proofs, yet they refused to change the curriculum and incorporate it into their ideas.
It seems like there's definitely a force, a higher up force that calls the shots as far as what is acceptable and what isn't. And I'd say that we're just locked into this prison of acceptable and unacceptable conscious viewpoints concerning science, especially. It's blatantly obvious in politics that to have any third party view of our system of government here in the United States is not only unacceptable, but untenable and doesn't work and doesn't get the media coverage. I mean, it's so obvious in that sense, but what academics don't see is the same systems set up within the sciences themselves. I mean, so you have
Right.
basic biology, which is centered around this fraud nuclear atom. The cosmologies in science are all centered around this non-existent nuclear atom. And as Russell said of the
Sure.
nuclear atom,
Yeah.
he had a laugh looking at he goes, as for those little studded balls that supposedly describe the atom, I find them laughable, he said.
Yeah, and think about geology. All these dates that they know for sure exist because it's all based on a nuclear atom. So what does that do to their entire dating system?
Right. Well, that's really the first domino out of the gate. And if Dewey B. Larson, in his book, demolished the entire foundation for the nuclear atom, then if that domino goes, then so must all the other dominoes which are built upon it. And that includes quantum physics.
Right, exactly.
All right.
Okay, so moving on page 65 here. He says the first indication that atoms had some structure came from the discovery of X-rays, a new radiation which rapidly found its now well-known application in medicine. X-rays, however, are not the only radiation emitted by atoms. Soon after their discovery, other kinds of radiation were discovered which are emitted by the atoms of so-called radioactive substances. The phenomena of radioactivity gave definite proof of the composite nature of atoms, showing that the atoms of radioactive substances not only emit various types of radiation, but also transform themselves into atoms of completely different substances. Ernest Rutherford realized that the so-called alpha particles emanating from radioactive substances were high-speed projectiles of subatomic size which could be used to explore the interior of the atom. They could be fired at the atoms, and from the way they were deflected, one could draw conclusions about the atom's structure. When Rutherford bombarded atoms with these alpha particles, he obtained sensational and totally unexpected results. Far from being the hard, solid particles they were believed to be since antiquity, the atoms turned out to be consist of vast regions of space in which extremely small particles, the electrons, moved around the nucleus bound to by its electric forces. Okay, so that last sentence is a total fraud. I mean, there's no proof of that whatsoever. This is just interjected into his little spiel here, and he's falsely validated this electron moving around in a nucleus. There's no reason to even bring this into the story here, but yet he does. So he falsely validates this, and what we actually see when we're looking at Rutherford and Bohr and them bombarding their atoms, with these alpha particles, we're seeing confirmation of Russell's work. Because what is the wave field? The cubic wave field is mostly space. All the activity is going on at a tiny point in the very center of this massive,
Which is the anode,
the
right.
point. Exactly. The space around it is millions of times greater than the little tiny anode. So what Rutherford and Bohr did was they confirmed Russell's view of the atom.
That's interesting. And how would Russell describe, I know in Secret of Light, he mentions, protons, neutrons, and electrons, but more in that double entendre kind of presentation mode. How would you describe Russell's view of these so-called particles, in particular the electron?
Right. Well, Russell was actually totally opposed to the nuclear theory of the atom, and that's what atomic suicide was all about. It was a scathing diatribe against this non-existent nuclear atom. The reason that Russell even used these terms was in order to convey to people the idea that there are no singly charged particles in the universe. If somebody says they're talking about an electron particle, it would be a discharging particle, but everything is bisexual. There can't be a singly charged particle in Russellian science. So if it's an electron, it would be discharging. If it's a proton, it would be charging. And if it was a neutron, it would be balanced. It would be perfectly balanced between charge and discharge.
So then, in other words, it's a quality of an anode that they're describing as three different particles.
Exactly.
Okay, makes sense. Well, where would you like to continue from?
Oh, let's just keep going on with the book here. He falsifies this in this last statement about the electron being in an orbit, there's no proof of that at all. Okay, so on page 66, Copper says, soon after the emergence of this planetary model of the atom, it was discovered that the number of electrons in the atoms of an element determine the element's chemical properties. And today we know that the whole periodical table of the elements can be built up by successively adding protons and neutrons to the nucleus of the lightest atoms, hydrogen, and then corresponding number of electrons to the atomic shell. The interaction between the atoms gives rise to the various chemical properties so that all of chemistry can now in principle be understood on the basis of the laws of atomic physics. So this dysfunctional so-called understanding of chemistry is what's led us to this extremely toxic world of toxic medicines, toxic fertilizers, herbicides, chemicals for the environment, cleansers. I mean, it just goes on and on. If chemists really knew what they were doing, they would be creating products that had no toxic side effects. It would not kill untold beings and animals and creatures and
Sure.
humans
There'd be no poison warnings and poison control centers
and
and,
make us sick, you know.
yeah, exactly.
So then he goes on, he says, these laws, however, were not easy to recognize. They were discovered in the 1920s by an international group of physicists, including Niels Bohr from Denmark, Louis de Broglie from France, Erwin Schrödinger and Wolfgang Pauli from Austria, Werner Heisenberg from Germany, and Paul Dirac from England. So this was the Copenhagen group, as they were called, a group of Jewish scientists who were all committed to basically validating and pushing this false theory of quantum mechanics. So let's see. As we go up to page 67, he says the concept of quantum theory was not easy to accept even after their mathematical formulation had been completed. Their effect on the physics imagination was truly shattering. Rutherford's experiments had shown that atoms, instead of being hard and indestructible, consisted of vast regions of space in which extremely small particles moved. And now quantum theory made it clear that even these particles were nothing like the solid objects of classical physics. The subatomic units of matter are very abstract entities which have a dual aspect. So now he's interjected this, this particle wave duality fraud into this and trying to validate it. Depending on how we look at them, they appear sometimes as particles, sometimes as waves. So these things don't have a real reality. It all just depends on the way that we look at them. I mean, what do you think of that, Matt?
Interesting. It's interesting. Yeah, I mean,
You
you
see
could,
that they can even let their minds go there. It's crazy,
as something's presented, you could be made to look upon it any way. But that's interesting. How did I know there are a group of British scientists, at least I've heard it mentioned, that thoroughly disagreed and were almost blown away by the promotion of Saint Einstein. Were there not several different scientists around the world, but particularly in Britain, a group of them were just astonished that this was being promoted and pushed in such a forceful way?
Well, this is true of all these things, of big bangs and black holes and all these bizarre theories. There's always, intelligent people that, from the very inception that speak out and say that it's insanity, yet you never hear their opinions at all. You only hear what the powers that be want you to hear,
Right,
which is their BS.
because the winners write history.
Absolutely.
And he who sits in the chair of the University of the Science Department controls the flow of information, which happen to be all string theorists these days. And it's funny to me that, basically what we have here is like just the fact, like, here's a quote I penciled in, page 73. Physicists soon realized that they were here confronted with a new force of nature, which does not manifest itself anywhere outside of the nucleus. A new force of nature. Okay, so this I made a note. Another force added to all the other forces, which basically we further divide the ability to simplify and basically throw Occam's razor out the window. So, as Russell stated, electricity is the only force, and it's stated brilliantly because all the effects of motion are effects of that one force itself. And that is Occam's razor on steroids. You can't get more Occam than that. So all of the so-called effects are electrical, and that just unifies our views as opposed to dividing them further and confusing the legions of people that come behind these falsifiers.
Right. And the strong and weak nuclear forces are non-existent because there's no such thing as a nuclear atom. And gravity is stillness, and magnetism is also stillness. So there goes all their forces. There's only one force, and it's electricity. So when they're talking about force fields and all this other stuff, it's complete garbage. So just going on here, page 67, he continues on. He says, this property of matter and of light is very strange. It seems impossible to accept that something can be at the same time a particle, i.e., an entity confined to a very small volume, and a wave, which is spread out over a large region of space. This contradiction gave rise to most of the cone-like paradoxes, which finally led to the formulation of quantum theory. Well, as we can see, this is pure BS. The whole development started when Max Planck discovered the energy of heat radiation is not emitted continuously, but appears in the form of energy packets. Einstein called these energy packets quanta, or fundamental quantums of energy, and recognized that them as fundamental aspect of nature. He was bold enough to postulate that light and every other form of electromagnetic radiation can appear not only as electromagnetic waves, but also in the form of these quanta. The light quanta which gave quantum theory its name have since been accepted as bona fide particles and are now called photons.
Hmm.
Now, photons are probably the biggest bullshit of anything in all of academic science. They have no relationship whatsoever to reality. It's what's called a wave packet. It's how many of these undulatory waves that don't exist happen per second in their theory. So, the photon does not exist. There's no such thing as a photon particle or a ball. Light is waves. That's all light is. There's light creates particles, but light is not particles itself. There's no such thing as a photon. So when people talk about photons or quantums, you can tell you'll know instantly they don't know what they're talking about because they've done no research at all, which shows that these things are actually false.
Yeah, well, if any waves there are the thought waves that these uh, basic deceptions create in people's minds, which become thoughts or particles which may or may not exist. So these photons, this is the theory of light leaving the sun, comes and travels to the earth in photons. Is that how they currently view it?
Yeah, and he goes on right here to say they are particles of a special kind, however, massless. Okay, so how could they be a particle if they don't have any mass? And always traveling with the speed of light. Well, light doesn't travel,
Right,
so moot point. Let's just keep moving on. That's
exactly.
absurd.
And
The
we, we
apparent
we have a video
contradiction.
too. I just want to stress this. There's a video of the cubic wave field mirrors that I'll try to get put into here so that people can see how light is reproduced wave field to wave field and is everywhere
The mirror cube.
simultaneously. Exactly. So I'll try to
Yeah,
put that into
yeah.
this part as we're speaking of it in the video. Okay, go ahead.
Absolutely, because it's instant proof. You look at the mirror cube and you see the images going off into infinity. Well, how long does it take to get to infinity? I mean, it's instantaneous, but the reason being that there is no distance, nothing's traveling. It's all an illusion.
Right.
And that's what's going on from every point in the entire universe. The creators is centering every point and creating this illusion, this Maya of motion and the 3D cosmic light cinema.
Hmm. Yeah,
So
and when we,
continuing on.
it's funny when
Oh,
we
sorry,
think
go ahead.
when they tell us about light taking millions of years to get here, that by the time we
Right.
see light from a star that's 100 million light years away, that civilization has already come and gone and died and ceased to exist. I find that silly because one realization I had under the entheogen was that now is the only time. It's the only moment, and it's happening everywhere in the universe simultaneously. Which means
Right.
when you truly
Uh,
understand that everything is an occurrence happening simultaneously, then this idea of traveling, or light traveling, it really makes sense when I read Russell and I understood what that vision was telling me. So that,
right.
the repeating of light from wave field to wave field simultaneously throughout all creation voids the need of light to travel anywhere. And it's proven in these models of these cubes. I was given a cube, two cubes actually. One's clear acrylic cube that has a inertial and secondary and vertical plane in there. The other is a mirror cube that was made by friends of Jim and Jackie Porter. And the mirror cube has a little corner cut out where you could put your eye into it. And when you look in there, you see subdivisions of cubes going in infinite directions. I mean, in all directions, put it that way,
Yeah.
to infinity.
Yeah.
It's just incredible. So I'd like to get some of those made and actually give some away or sell some possibly. But they're wonderful for kids to look into and use their imaginations and truly see how light is reproduced from wave field to wave field as opposed to this idea of traveling anywhere. Go ahead, Rob.
Right. And yeah, and as you look out at the stars, you see that all that light that we're looking at from those stars, it's already here. It's not traveling from here to there. It's it's already here. They didn't turn it on with like a flashlight or something, and it began polarizing repeating itself wave field to wave field. That light's already here. The other side of the story here too is that the still magnetic light is ubiquitous. So the the motions from any cubic wave field are instantly known in any other cubic wave field because the still magnetic light which centers and bounds it is the same. So there is no distance. So instantly every other cube in the entire universe knows what every other cube is doing because it doesn't take trillions of light years to inform another cube a trillion so-called light years away. You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely. And I just got a vision come to my head. I must share it. What the powers that never were, this elite, so-called elite, basically steered man into a two-dimensional box canyon around the turn of the 20th century, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
Because this idea of things traveling from point A to point B is a linear concept.
Right.
It seems that the Renaissance brought with it in art three-dimensional ability in painting and sculpting and new depth perceptions. And it seems that the more three-dimensionally a person can think, the more of a threat they are to a system of control, being that linear thinking and two-dimensional thinking. In other words, following the clock. They have us all chained to the clock. We can't do anything Sunday night because we have to be at work Monday morning. So that this is a very real prison, this two-dimensional linear prison of conceptualization of man's universe.
Oh, yeah. Childlike, simplified, but a massive misrepresentation of reality.
Right.
So moving on here, page 68, he says the apparent contradiction between the particle and the wave was solved in a completely unexpected way, which called in question the very foundation of the mechanistic worldview, the concept of reality of matter. At the subatomic level, matter does not exist with certainty at definite places, but rather shows tendencies to exist. And atomic events do not occur with certainty at definite times and in definite ways, but rather tendencies to occur. In the formalism of quantum theory, these tendencies are expressed as probabilities and are associated with mathematical quantities which take the form of waves. This is why particles can be waves at the same time. They are not real three-dimensional waves like sound or water waves. They are probability waves, abstract mathematical quantities with all the characteristic properties of waves which are related to the probabilities of the finding the particle at particular points in space and at particular times. All the laws of atomic physics are expressed in terms of these probabilities, not reality, probabilities and tendencies. This is what this is really about. We're getting at the guts of this now, Matt.
This is a walking paradox. It has paradox written all over it.
It's an absurdity because they've swapped out reality for this probability and tendency garbage, which has nothing to do. And it's once again we go back to the foundation. What's it based on? It's indeterminacy.
Mathematics too, right?
Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, which is a fraud. There's no such thing as an uncertainty principle. So here they've continued on and they're building this edifice out of this false pillar. And let's see, I guess we just keep going on a little bit here.
Right.
Quantum theory has thus demolished the classical concepts of solid objects and of strictly deterministic laws of nature. At the subatomic level, the solid material objects of classical physics dissolve into wave-like patterns of probabilities. And these patterns ultimately do not represent probabilities of things, but rather probabilities of interconnections. A careful analysis of the process of observation in atomic physics has shown that the subatomic particles have no meaning as isolated entities, but can only be understood as interconnections between the preparation of an experiment and the subsequent measurement. Quantum theory thus reveals a basic oneness of the universe. It shows that we cannot decompose the world into independently existing small units. These relationships always include the observer in an essential way. The human observer constitutes the final link in the chain of observational processes, and the properties of the atomic object can only be understood in the terms of the object's interaction with the observer. This means that the classical ideal of an objective description of nature is no longer valid. So here we're starting to enter into this this quack idea that somehow the observer is what controls reality, and in fact, the creator does. It's not. It doesn't matter whether we observe it or not. There's a fundamental reality to all of creation. They kind of pretend like if the observer wasn't here, none of this would exist.
Right.
Right.
This kind of sets up the whole what the bleep do we know? You know,
exactly.
Right.
Exactly. This idea that you can somehow influence the trajectory of a particle through your mind, or in the terms of what the bleep we know, or the secret, it calls into this idiotic secret law of attraction, where you could just, fantasize about your little fantasy, heaven on Earth, and that it will magically appear for you just for going to the lectures and seeing Ramtha and fantasizing about it, So.
Wow,
Absurd.
Really reaching.
Well, it's just ridiculous, man. The New Age movement has been so ruined by this psychosis, and that's why we're doing this. We're both sick of this, and it's about time to put it to rest forever.
Agreed.
So, let's see. Just continuing on here. I could read on every page, but I'm just trying to skip through and find some. Here we are with probability waves. In the atom, then, the electron settles in orbits in such a way that there is an optimal balance between the attraction of the nucleus and the reluctance to be confined. The atomic orbits, however, are very different from those of the planets in the solar system, the difference arising from the wave nature of the electrons. An atom cannot be pictured as a small planetary system. Rather than particles circling around the nucleus, we have to imagine probability waves. See, the nuke atom didn't work for them, so now it's these probability waves that are there.
Right.
So we're not even dealing with nature here. We're just dealing with some crap that these people dreamed up and are calling probability waves. In the orbits, the electron waves have to be arranged in such a way that their ends meet, that they form patterns known as standing waves. Well, see, it's gotten ridiculous. I'm going to keep moving on here a little bit. Going on to page 75, Copper says, soon after the formulation of quantum theory, it became clear that a complete theory of nuclear phenomena must not only be a quantum theory, but must also incorporate relativity theory. And as we mentioned earlier, Einstein was absolutely opposed to it. So here they want to add quantum theory to relativity theory, despite the fact that Einstein was completely opposed to quantum theory. This is because the particles confined to the dimensions of the size of nuclei often move so fast that their speed comes close to the speed of light. This fact is crucial for the description of their behavior, because every description of natural phenomena involving velocities close to the speed of light has to take relativity theory into account. No, it doesn't. So here he's forcing into this. Mm-hmm. It has to be, as we say, a relativistic description. What we need, therefore, is a full understanding of the nuclear world is a theory which incorporates both quantum theory and relativity theory. No, we don't, because relativity theory has been debunked. So here we have these people just, holding on to these debunked ideas and trying to force them together. Such a theory has not yet been found, and therefore we have as yet been unable to formulate a complete theory of the nucleus. Although we know quite a lot about nuclear structure and about the interactions between nuclear particles, we do not yet understand the nature and the complicated form of the nuclear force on a fundamental level. There is no nuclear force. There's no strong force. There's no weak force, because there's no nuclear atom. There is no complete theory of the nuclear particle world comparable to quantum theory for the atomic world, Copper states. We do have several quantum relativistic models which describe some aspects of the world of particles very well, but the fusion of quantum and relativity theory into complete theory of a particle world is still the central problem and a great challenge of modern fundamental physics. So here they are stated it themselves. They're sitting here desperately trying to combine these things, and they'll never combine because they have nothing to do with reality.
Basically, moving toward a deeper rabbit hole.
Absolutely.
It seems
So,
the more they try to marry this stuff, all this non-existent formula together, the harder it is for anybody to make heads or tails out of what the hell is really going on. I mean,
well, it's
it's
by
the
design.
the good old boys club. You're not,
Yeah,
if
exactly.
you don't have the mathematical background, in other words, to wrap your head around years and years of studying, this universe is not that complex in sense of cause, and when that's the beauty of Russell lifted the veil and he lifts the veil for anyone who reads the work because, when one has the veil lifted for themselves, then by right of extension, one can lift the veil for others. What it seems to me is that there's just one curtain dropped after another, and the participants in the audience can't see anything going on behind the curtain. And don't pay any attention to that man or those men in the white coats behind the curtain because we'll figure it all out for you and let you know what it is, You just dig a little bit, you peer behind the curtain and you see the fallacy of these different kinds of trying to marry all these different unnatural theories together. You're
Exactly.
locking minds into a confusing look at matter, basically, is what's happening. I mean, in Russellian science, you have a very simple and uncomplex union, a seamless science, and that's really Occam's razor to the core. It's the simpler the explanation, the more true it is. So, at least in my opinion, I agree with that, and it makes it understandable, and it also confirms nature and correlates to nature. So, not only do you have the backing of nature to support an assertion, but nature shows us in so many wordless ways how this very composite, seamless cosmology is really the language of light itself, telling us in so many ways.
Exactly. So let's see. Moving on here,
Mm-hmm.
page 77 at the bottom of the page, Copper says, before relativistic particle physics, the constituents of matter had always been considered as being either elementary units, which were indestructible and unchangeable, or as composite objects, which could be broken up into their constituent parts. And the basic question was whether one could divide matter again and again, or whether one would finally arrive at some smallest indivisible units. So here we're getting into the hard-on collider. We love
Right, the
to
particle
deride.
smashers. Mm-hmm.
Exactly, these particle physicists. So he says, after Dirac's discovery, the whole question of the division of matter appeared in a new light. When two particles collide with high energies, they generally break into pieces, but these pieces are not smaller than the original particles. They are again particles of the same kind and are created out of the energy of motion, kinetic energy, involved in the collision. So you hearing that?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you got two particles that are identical after the collision.
Right.
So here's a massive contradiction in their basic foundations of this particle physics. He says the whole problem of dividing matter is thus resolved in an unexpected sense. Really? The only way to divide subatomic particles further is to bang them together in collision processes involving high energies. This way we can divide matter again and again, but we never obtain smaller pieces because we just create particles out of the energy involved in the process. The subatomic particles are thus destructible and indestructible at the same time.
Okay. Well,
Would you care to comment on that?
yeah, I would say that's another root cause of the psychosis surrounding particle
Yes.
smashers. The only way to get
Mhm.
physicists to consider stillness as causal is by banging their heads together until they fall down and become still enough to realize their fallacy of smashing everything about. I mean, what is this? Where does this come from? Bury it under the ground, 100 feet below the earth, and in secret, let's smash things together and just basically pillage and rape the tax money being collected for our own entitlement.
Right, and this goes to your what you've been concentrating on lately, the difference between motion and stillness. He says high energy collisions of subatomic particles are the principal method used by physicists to study the properties of these particles, and the particle physics is therefore also called high energy physics. So there they are. They're looking for reality in motion. They're trying
Right.
to describe motion with motion. And what we've already seen is they've already said that the particles are the same size. So how are they creating these different particles? It says the kinetic energies required for the collision experiments are achieved by means of huge particle accelerators, enormous circular machines with circumferences of several miles in which
Right.
protons are accelerated to velocities near the speed of light and are then made to collide with other protons or with neutrons. It is impressive that machines of this size are needed to study the world of the infinitely small. They are the super microscopes of our times.
I wouldn't call it a microscope at all. I'd say you're taking
Right.
something that's in a perfectly balanced state and imbalancing it, trying to figure out how it works. I mean, why don't you just look at the stars and the motions of stars and planets to figure out, the same as Walter knew that all these motions are ubiquitous in a sense
The
that
secret lies in the wave.
that's right.
Right.
That's right. And the wave is ubiquitous from the smallest to the largest of these so-called particles. But yeah,
Exactly.
interesting.
So he says most of the particles created in these collisions live for only an extremely short time, much less than a millionth of a second, after which they disintegrate again into protons, neutrons, and electrons. How is that possible? That's ridiculous. In spite of the exceedingly short lifetimes, these particles can not only be detected and their properties measured, but are actually made to leave tracks, which can be photographed. And now this is the way that they study these things. They produce tracks in bubble chambers, but that track is not the particle itself. It's the wake of something that moved through it, you know.
Right, right.
And an electrical waveform moving through it could leave a track as well.
Hmm.
So what they're calling, particles are these spiraling electrical vortices which discharge after being blown up in collisions. These particle tracks are produced in so-called bubble chambers in a manner similar to the way a jet plane makes a trail in the sky. The actual particles are many orders of magnitude smaller than the bubbles making up the tracks, but from the thickness and curvature of a track, physicists can identify the particle that caused it. So you get a track moving in a certain way, and it's got a certain spin or a vortex to it. They call it something. They give it a name,
Hmm. Right.
and it's just discharge. It's just a spiraling discharge form, and yet they're going to try to define it as a particle. You see how seriously diluted this entire mess is?
Yeah, they're
He
playing
says that
they're playing with an entropic world here. They're just it's like studying a corpse and not being, let's smash the corpse into another corpse and see what kind of corpse comes out of that corpse. It's all
yeah,
the
exactly.
death study of the decay of the
Absolutely.
radiative processes of creation. There's no
The
we're,
dying
yeah,
carcasses.
it's a study of dying carcasses basically.
Okay, so continue on. He says the collisions of particles are our main experimental method to study their properties and interactions. And the beautiful lines, spirals, and curves traced by the particles in bubble chambers are thus of paramount importance for modern physics. So that tells you where they're at.
Right.
The high-energy scattering experience of the past decades has shown us the dynamic and ever-changing nature of particle world in the most striking way. Matter has appeared in these experiments as completely mutable. And finally, here on page 81, as we wrap this up, Capra says, in modern physics, the universe is thus experienced as a dynamic, inseparable whole, which always includes the observer in an essential way. In this experience, the traditional concepts of space and time, of isolated objects, and of cause and effect lose their meaning. Such an experience, however, is very similar to that of the Eastern mystics. The similarity becomes apparent in quantum and relativity theory, and becomes even stronger in quantum relativistic models of subatomic physics, where both these theories combine to produce the most striking parallels to Eastern mysticism. So, what he's saying here is that this falsification of quantum theory, this false marrying of quantum theory to the false relativistic theory, is in fact the best way to view reality, and it somehow is very similar to Eastern mysticism. And I would just state that the process of mysticism divine illumination and empirical geeking around and formulating bizarre ad hoc theories, the two are not even remotely compatible.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, assuming once again that egghead smashing particles together is akin to mindfulness and quietism is an absurdity. You know, I mean, Eastern mysticism has no need of smashing particles together in bubble chambers to get a clear understanding of what is going on in the universe or how it comes into being. What Eastern mysticism does promote is the opposite, which is being still and ceasing all the questionings which continually disrupt the silence of mindfulness. You know, and this attempt at marrying these two highly opposed philosophies is abhorrent and ridiculous, and basically further demonstrates the lonely branch of sense-based seeking that these physicists of the 20th century have crawled out upon. And it's just a matter of time before this branch breaks and falls off into the river to forever flow out of human consciousness, as it should, you know, because it has no real import. What has it done to provide clarity and understanding and free energy and create abundance? What has it done to, you know, what have these particle chambers done to stop the suffering in third world, supposedly third world countries, you know, which there aren't any third, everything's first world. I mean, this mentality that you know, somehow this is the cutting edge of science. It's nothing cutting edge about it. It's a demonstrable, deplorable condition which supports oligarchies. It supports plutocracy and technocracy, and it's created all the very things. It's isolationism at its best. It doesn't, you know, that doesn't invite free thought and questions. It dictates its rules and its environment in the UC systems and the university campuses. That, you know, if you, how many friends of ours have we talked to, Robert, in different forums and formats who have said they got chastised by their physics professor for asking questions? I mean, how many times did Rowie tell us, you know, that he questioned his physics professor and got thrown out of class for it? Or, you know, Ashley Johnson from the UK, you know, he questions his physics professor and they want to put him on some form of behavior modification drug from a pharmaceutical company. When is it that questioning is a sign of, you know, obsessive defiant disorder, as they now have this new disorder to basically round up any people that refuse to think two-dimensionally any longer? I mean, the heart of science, true science, is to question everything. And that's what started our series. So, you know, it's the beauty of when Russell said nature was his only teacher, that his school was nature. You know, that's what gives man the ability to think of the kinds of things that Russell was able to bring forth, and Tesla and Schauberger and Murray and others. You know, it's implicit that we get away from this authoritarianism mindset, which is destroying the ability to critically think. Why don't you give us your roundup of this entire book in its essence? What does it convey to you?
Just to me, it conveys just mind control. You know, this is the absolute product of mind control. This is how social engineering works. These absurd propositions are put forward in a book like this, and people, there's just no critical thought. You know, I mean, how come people weren't screaming against it? This, I think, this was written in the 70s or something.
Right.
And I've never heard one person ever say a word against the Tao of physics. And you just have to wonder why. And well, the answer is, you know, social engineering. It's creating a slave population of uncritical, you know, non-thinking, undiscerning people that really don't give a shit. They don't give a shit about anything except for getting the little bit of crap that they need to make them happy. You know, the little trinkets and possessions and whatever types of food and drink, and they're good to go. That's all they want. You know. And that's sad. But that seems to be the way humanity has been conditioned and created to be just these uncritical thinking people that just go along to get along.
That's right. And as we know, slavery perpetuates its own bondage, you know, through the thought mechanisms that create voluntary slavery, which is these models of academia that, you know, are taught to us as gospel, yet no one questions it.
Yeah,
You know,
and they paid us for this. You know,
yeah,
the slave mentality. They'd love to crucify us, these slave, you know, and especially the gatekeepers of the slaves. You know, the physicists, the so-called physicists and academics who buy this crap. These people would love to see us crucified. You know, because
right.
what we're doing is we're challenging the very foundations of a false belief system that they paid a lot of money to get brainwashed with, and that doesn't go down real well with them. So
No,
they would
no.
love. I mean, you and I have dealt with this constantly. You know, all these people attacking us and telling us read a science book, as if we don't understand these idiotic theories. Believe me, when you study this stuff, you're constantly seeing other theories juxtaposed with the lamestream version, and the lamestream version always looks lame. Even with false theories, even with theories that aren't quite right, they still make a mockery of the lamestream science.
Right. And when you question science to that degree, they always pull out the Hawking card. You know,
The cripple out. Roll
roll
the
the
cripple out, and nobody will criticize them. You
right.
know, it'd be too cruel, right? Right?
Yeah, roll them out on the stage, hit play on the CD player, and you know,
Right. Or
yeah.
they got
So
Michio Kuku or Carl Sagan or any of these other shills, you know, to do their bidding for them, you know, to do their hawking their false physics. So yeah, it's even that stuff seems so designed, you know, to pick these bizarre, strange characters like, you know, Sagan. They always have to have something freaky about themselves in order to be a spokesman or a representative for the entire scientific community. And it always has to do with this kind of disheveled or screwed up or the nutty professor or this, you know, it all kind of relates to this Hollywood myth of Einstein, the super fucking genius, you know, who basically is wrong about just about everything, you know.
right, right. Yeah, and who gave us the concrete refrigerator? Not because it was his own
Yes.
idea, but because there was a guy who presented a patent for it, and he felt that it was an important humanitarian mission for him to get on board because some little girl down at the end of the street died from a poisonous gas released by an electric refrigerator. So,
Oh,
yeah,
geez.
that's an interesting phenomena. I mean, it's psychopathy promotes it from within its own ranks. And if it's not evident to people by now, then you're living in a cave, and you might as well,
Yeah.
move to the Azores with Osama bin Laden and your 72 virgins, and hopefully you end out your life on a nice note, because there's really no land left to stand on for people that live in the mythological age of debunked theories and basic unnatural laws that they accept as gospels.
And we had the quote directly from Heisenberg, you know, when we read through this. He said, "We are not questioning nature itself," right? And so they're telling you this isn't about nature. It's not about reality. It's about the geeky mathematical reality that they've invented in their own minds. It has nothing to do with reality,
Yeah,
not nature.
let's not deal with what we live in. Let's deal with something
Right,
that's not natural, and then
right.
stem from there and see what we can build upon the unnatural and the unobservable in nature's realm. That's why I
Yeah,
love the
judge
natural
nature from a
scientists.
bizarre, yeah, judge a nature from a bizarre freaking model, you know? And that's all
Exactly.
they're doing.
That's what I love about Walter and Tesla and these men of nature. But real quick, I want to
Yeah.
read from E! Magazine called Glorious Human. There's an article that was put forth by a Jeff Ward, who's author of Spirals, The Pattern of Existence. He wrote that we have failed to appreciate that vortices are the essence of our experience. This is because of the prevailing Copernican perspective of the universe, which tends to flatten things out. In other words, the 2D view and smash and stare approach. Some of the dissenting scientists who have challenged quantum relativism and quantum mechanics, and there are many dissenting scientists out there. So there's no consensus, even within science itself, to support these quantum views, which is telling. That's important to know, and you don't often hear of these people because one book that science would not like to see mentioned is Meaning in Absurdity by Bernardo Kastrup, who points out in his book that the concept of entanglement destroys any possible acceptance of a five-sense reality. We have Simon Groblacher, along with a group of Polish and Austrian physicists, who announced in a paper entitled An Experimental Test of Non-Local Realism and was published in Nature in April of 2007. that hidden properties in the quantum substrate or background matter, which supposedly caused entanglement, were untenable. We have Dr. Viktor Grebennikov and the Chernovitsky group of the Ukraine Academy of Sciences found that the best passive torsion generators were formed by cones shaped in the phi or golden ratio of 1.618, which revealed that torsion waves were actually phi spirals, as a cone duplicating this pattern harnessed waves the best. That supports Walter Russell. You know, they're finding these things are, and these are the sciences that we don't hear much about. You know, the torsion generator, of course, the toroid, were formed by cones shaped in the phi or golden ratio. That absolutely supports Walter Russell. Carl Jung, I'm going to finish with his quote, when discussing the goal of human wholeness, of self-actualization, said that the way was not straight, but went in spirals. So, Robert, I want to thank you for coming on to the Exploration of Consciousness. I'm happy to do a show again, especially with you out of the gate for 2013. I may pick up some more, but there's just really not anyone I'm real interested in having on, because most people just still continue to parrot a lot of these debunked things, which means they haven't done the homework of discerning what it is they're bringing up and peddling as an explanation for a cosmology or a unified theory of everything. So it's kind of hard to have them on without then having to ask them why they believe in such things and have they even looked into such things. So, hopefully there'll be a new group of researchers coming up who do the homework of reading the works of Dewey B. Larson, debunking these so-called nuclear atoms and looking into things. And may this show serve as a platform to get more people interested in critical thought and discerning for themselves the truths in science versus the mistruths. There are a lot of good scientists out there. There's a lot of creationists, if you will, who have been ousted from their positions of tenure due to their thoughts of there being an intelligent designer behind all of this. That movie with Ben Stein, who actually did a really good movie on that whole perspective about creationist professors being ousted from their jobs for having that opinion. I mean, this is basically what we're dealing with is a two-dimensional dictatorship, and it needs to go straight to hell, as you've said in previous interviews we've done. So I want to thank you for coming on to the Exploration of Consciousness, and go ahead and give your websites out to the listeners who may not be familiar with your work.
Oh, it's my great pleasure, Matt, and I enjoy seeing the foundations of this false science crumbling around us. It's about time. It's about time we start copying nature with biomimicry and start producing the eternal abundance and the happiness, the prosperity that can bring for this entire planet. My website is www.feandft.com. That's free energy and free thinking abbreviated. And my YouTube channel is 77G Slinger. So we have lots of videos on Russellian science, and of course a lot of supporting videos from people like Dr. Bat, like Dr. Like W.C. Wright, and Frank Chester, and many others who are actually proving Russellian science with their work, even though they may not know that they're proving it.
Yeah, I want to absolutely recommend people check out Robert's YouTube channel, because it is the largest collection of Russellian supportive videos on the internet anywhere out there. So all these different, even people who are speaking about the same natural science who don't even have the awareness of it, knowingly or unknowingly support the view that Walter Russell put forth to the scientific world, which was thrown in the wastebasket, as Russell said. So definitely people check out this work. I'm going to end the show today with a song called Mary Jane, and this is the acoustic version, which also features myself on piano, that was recorded in Vacaville, California at Robert's Symposium in October of 2012. With that, Robert, thank you so much again for coming on to the Exploration of Consciousness. We're going to be working to release Unit 17 on the true nature of magnetism. So stay with us, folks, into the future. We have much more to come. And until then, have a wonderful day, and wherever you are, be safe in the world and think for yourself.
And much love to all of y'all.